This is the Backporch Education Podcast. Today on the show, Steve and I talk about analysis and synthesis. That is, pulling it apart and putting it back together.
Get your education. Backporch education.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I like hard work, Steve.
Do you?
Yeah.
You must. We keep making these podcasts.
But
And you keep bringing these poems, and they're pretty hard work too, man.
Well, I like
see
other
there.
people's hard work.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
So this poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge is a classic. It is. Let me look here. Oh yeah, I think it's a sonnet. Yeah, I think it is.
So short.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, 4. Yeah, it is. So
I love sonnets.
It's
Limericks
a great
are
one.
pretty good too.
That art form, the limerick. Clara Hughes are also really funny if you want to go down a rabbit hole. But okay, so this sonnet entitled "Work Without Hope" is, I think, a nice place for us to start.
All right.
All nature seems at work. Slugs leave their lair. The bees are stirring. Birds are on the wing. And winter slumbering in the open air wears on his smiling face a dream of spring. And I, the while, the sole unbusy thing, nor honey make, nor pair, nor build, nor sing. Yet well I ken the banks where amaranths blow, have traced the fount whence streams of nectar flow. Bloom, O ye amaranths, bloom for whom ye may. For me ye bloom not, glide rich streams away. With lips unbrightened, wreathless brow I stroll, and would you learn the spells that drowse my soul? Work without hope draws nectar in a sieve, and hope without an object cannot live. I recently read an article. You wrote it.
Oh, no. Here we go. Editor's pen is out.
On analysis and synthesis, and I thought that it was great. I appreciated it. Thank you for sharing it with me. We'll be sure to include a link on the podcast. I think that we would all benefit from reading it. But here's what I propose. I propose that we take your thesis and we do some analysis and then some synthesis.
Okay.
I want to take what you said and I want to break it down and then I want to put it back together.
To model what we're talking about.
I don't know. That's what I want to do. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but I'd like to try it. So, as I understood it, what you were saying is that analysis and synthesis are different skills and or activities, and these days we focus a lot more on analysis than synthesis. That's not because, and you're not here saying that analysis is bad.
No,
in fact, it's good. Yeah, it's amazing.
But it's half the job.
But it's half, and we might. I don't think you said this, but I might snarkily add the lesser half, the easier half, maybe.
Okay.
The prior half.
Often the first half.
The first half.
Yeah. So often, in my estimation, we do half and leave it lay, and frustrate teacher and student.
Right. Because then that we just go out and tear something else out.
What was the lines from the poem?
Hope without an object cannot live.
Right. So it's
right.
staring at the pieces on the floor.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, okay. So start here. This image that you have of your dad pulling apart the car.
Yes. So
please recount that story.
my first vehicle is an old one, right? '69 Chevy Impala.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. 327 V8, and it wasn't perfect. I know that the farmer who owned it before me ran natural gas through it.
Ooh.
And it got converted back to be sold. So it was a clean machine, right? Natural gas runs
no
very,
doubt.
very
Yeah,
clean.
it's super clean. Yeah.
But it just had an odd
timing. Yeah.
There's a little hesitation, and for a young man like myself, this caused some complaints. I mentioned to my dad it seemed to be, maybe it needs a tune-up is the term. I'm not a mechanic. I have no idea what that meant.
And you were a teenager at the time.
Yes, a young man in Kansas when young men could drive at a very early age. And that's all that was said. And sometimes I drove it to school, and sometimes finances indicated it stayed at home, and I walked to school. It wasn't that far. I lived about 2 miles from my school.
Okay.
So a walk was possible. It was cool to drive, right?
No doubt.
But I come home, don't find my father in the house, go out in the backyard, and every piece of that engine was outside the hood, on the yard. I was amazed, A, that he had taken my engine apart, and B, that he had taken the care. He had a mechanic's background. He understood that order was key here. You don't just start throwing pieces. He had it laid out. He knew what with what.
Right.
He had it was very organized, very orderly, and I was impressed by that because I could not have done that.
In the grass on cardboard?
It is in the grass.
Just in the grass. Wow.
And he had a little station set up, and as the next piece was to be reassembled, he was inspecting it, cleaning it, if necessary, lubricating it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was going in correctly, with attention given to no broken parts, no improper
worn seals,
spacing, or I don't know. The gaps were all good.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Use your imaginations, everybody.
I have no earthly idea what I'm talking about. But there was that moment when once it was all back together and there were no pieces left on the ground.
Nice.
He handed me the key and said, "Give it a try." And it cranked up and it purred like a kitten.
Wow.
I wasn't one of those guys with the mufflers and glass packs and all that kind of thing, but it had a nice little rumble to it.
Yeah. It sounded like you knew it should.
And it worked.
Yeah.
How did you do that, Dad?
Right.
And again, 1969, you can still do that without being a computer genius.
Right.
And having all kinds of very specialized tools to hex nuts and so on. He taught me, without either of us knowing it, that this is the whole thing. It became a metaphor for me as I moved into teaching, that often whatever's being taught, the constituent pieces, the facts, the parts, the specifics, right? I think I put it in my article that the way I like to think about this, having taught logic for a while, is the difference between induction and deduction.
Right.
Right. One moves from the parts to the principle, and the other says, this being the principle, what are the probable parts?
We can derive the parts.
Right. So, in essence, Dad had an engine not working correctly, tears it all down.
Analysis.
Right. And then puts it all back, synthesizes it back into a engine, right? Not the pieces of an engine, but an engine.
Right.
That worked.
A properly functioning engine.
Yes, a working engine. and I think that metaphor has served me well in education for what I'm trying to do in most teaching experiences. That a student's mind needs to see the parts, and we're usually pretty good about that.
Right.
I've taught mostly in the humanities, so history, for example. What came before what? What are the dates? Who the major players? What's the geography? But being able to rattle off all those parts, walking around the yard and going, I think that's part of the carburetor, and that's a piston ring.
Yeah.
Is of no use and I mean that literally. Is of really no life use unless that knowledge is then put together for an operating engine to take you down the road.
Right.
Right. And so if our emphasis is on wisdom and virtue, knowing what's right, in particular, knowing the minutia of what is wise, it isn't even wisdom at that point, right? The scriptures call it knowledge. And when you start putting it together, it becomes understanding. And when you start living by it, there's your wisdom.
Yeah.
So there has to be this assembly. There has to be this connection.
Yeah.
The puzzle pieces have to be put together. And what we're hoping for is the finished. But with education, as opposed to the engine had, 463 parts, whatever. Sure. And when the 463rd goes click, it's done.
Right.
A human life is not like that.
Nope.
It's a lifetime.
Yeah.
Right. And so, who's it, Solon that... Croesus asked Solon if he was, tell me if I'm a happy man, and he said, I can't say until you're dead.
Right, count no man happy till he's dead.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the problem of education is we're continuously analyzing, synthesizing. It's not,
or we ought to be.
Well,
you're right. Education.
It's not a singular act. It's a continuous, almost a dance.
Yeah.
What needs to be broken down that they might understand and see the parts. Now, how can we put it back together so that they can use it?
Right. Well, and there's a sense in which this scales, right? When I recently performed minor repairs. I don't know what I'm doing either. Okay, on a generator that I have, and I pulled off what I called the carburetor. And if you took it into a small engine repair shop, and you held it up, they would say, that's a carburetor. I mean, that is what it was.
It's all the parts of a carburetor.
Right. So it's in terms of an engine, right, exactly. Like, in terms of an engine, the carburetor is a part. But when doing the other things I knew how to do didn't fix the problem, well, guess what? The carburetor just became a whole that is WHOLE, an entity, an entire thing that now I need to break apart further. So I did some analysis, pulled off, dismantled, but then I zeroed in on one part and I said, more analysis here, right? That sort of thing happens in education all the time.
Well, you
all
and I both
the time.
Work with literature, right?
Yeah.
And so you'll get the kid that actually read it.
Wow. Thank you, kid. If you're listening now,
thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
For me, it was about 6 years ago, but thank you if you're still No. So here we have this story, and the way they want to demonstrate their facility with the story is to just keep flooding me with the details.
Yeah, summary. Right.
So they start out, it's about a guy that killed his wife. Okay, but what happened? So then he starts to talk about what happened before the death, what we did, and what happened after. And there was this inspector dude, and and it really wasn't his wife; it was an old lady, and he used an accent. Oh, so now I know this story,
right? Right.
But what's it about?
Yeah.
I just told you.
Yeah.
No, you just told me its parts. Mm-hmm. When it's put together as a story, where is the story leading you?
Mm-hmm.
And if the author helps you, as Dostoevsky did in that instance,
Mm-hmm.
they go, I think it's about crime and punishment. Hey!
Yes.
Ding ding!
Right.
Winner, chicken
You're
dinner.
right. You found a part.
Right.
It's a critical part.
Now
Yeah.
why? You know, I
Right,
mean,
right.
so the teacher's constantly, when he senses that they don't see enough of, that the carburetor needs to be undone,
Right.
then that his questioning is designed to get them to take it apart.
Yep.
But he can't okay, you obviously know all the parts.
Right.
There's got to be this synthesis. And,
Yeah.
and I think Adler was wonderful on this. I know we keep coming back to these 3 columns, and we haven't ever done an actual podcast on the 3
Yeah,
columns.
we need to.
But this was his point, is that every lesson has usually dealt with somewhat in a lecture format, or I think there can be some experimental, especially in math, playing around with it on paper. But there's this breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
What all's here? What do I got here?
Right.
And then there's a coaching that goes on that has to do with the skills necessary
Right.
to break down, to read it for
Right.
its pieces,
Right.
and to synthesize.
How have we dealt with similar things like this before?
Right,
Right.
exactly,
That sort of thing.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, but to him, what would save education, what he thought we were lacking, was the synthetic act of the seminar, of getting 8 or 10 or 12 minds to seek together the whole. So what is that? We've obviously all read it. We've got the parts.
Mm-hmm.
But when we put it, let's put this back together,
Yeah.
and see where this goes.
Right.
And I see that all the time in almost every subject. So math, right?
Yeah.
How often have you seen it where they why do I have to show my work? Isn't it just synthesis? The answer.
Uh-huh.
No. I need to know how you got there.
Right.
Especially in the world of all the electronic cheats we have these
Right.
days. I want to.
Well,
Can you?
I want to measure your elegance.
Okay.
Right. Like, did you do it elegantly?
Yeah.
Like, did you? Because you may, in showing me your work, you may show me that you made. You did in 15 steps what you could have done in 4.
Right.
But because you don't know this thing, you're taking the long way around, which good on you for
Right.
synthesizing
You
it the
still
way
got to
you
the right,
could.
You get to the right place.
That's great.
But-
I'm not here for you. Could have done that without me. So I'm being better at math than you. I am able to step in and say, "Hey, dude, check this out."
Right.
And everybody grows, right?
And so the student knows I'm never going to need to know that answer 4.86.
Right.
I'm not sure when I'm ever going to be even computing a problem like this.
Mm-hmm.
But when they give me that, when are we ever going to need this stuff in real life, Mr. Hunter? You're right. When life no longer has any problems for you to solve,
Right. Yeah.
math is stupid.
Exactly.
But
until
then, there's this right synthesis and analysis. Right, I have to, in real life, faced with a real, legitimate life, often moral problem. There's analysis. What are the possibilities here?
Right.
What are the factors? Who all's involved?
Right.
What are the pieces? What are the possible ways this could be put together? What are the possible decisions?
Right.
Which one seems wisest and best? And the mathematical mind, the mind that's been trained in the discipline of problem solving,
Right.
is better suited to solve problems
Yep.
than the one that hasn't. So again, the sin we commit is when we specialize,
Yeah.
and all the math teachers want to turn all the kids into math lovers.
I do too. As a
I-
literature teacher, I want them to love math. Right.
I want them to love what's back behind it all.
Yeah.
And if we put the cart before the horse, we
Whichever card it
Jesus,
is, the
the
science
horse.
card or the
Yeah.
right.
Right, but when we start fragmenting this up and trying to get you to love pieces on the floor, no, I want the puzzle.
Right.
So that's to me, when we contemplated doing this, I don't know if we're ready for a conclusion yet or not, but my big takeaway, my big thing in thinking about this is I believe it is all one. I believe in the end, the only way it makes sense is when it's all synthesized together.
Yeah.
And the Spanish acquisition is just as important as my art class or algebra or
Sure.
it's all there.
Right.
And I may have a proclivity, an aptitude for certain parts of it that make me enjoy that more because it comes easy. But the hard parts, I talked with somebody here recently about swimming, right? These swimming competitions.
Okay.
And they have to choose what their various strokes are going to be, right? And I couldn't swim very well, and so my Boy Scout troop, when we got into a competitive swim meet, chose up by who's strong at what. Now what do we need? Elliot, you do the rest,
Yeah.
And I was telling my sons, I shocked myself and everybody else by coming in first in the backstroke. I think it's because I couldn't tell where I was going.
Right.
I was just going for it.
Right.
And nobody was more surprised than me when I whacked the wall.
Right.
And found out I'm here first.
Right. And I'm still breathing. Yeah. That's...
But there's the way everything is tied together, and that the Greeks understood this, that the mind and the body, right? And so school isn't about just a thing. Oh, you're really good at math. I'm going to step on toes here, but let's put you in a school that just does math, because make you into only this thing.
Yeah.
Right? That mathematician A is going to excel in some ways in your music class.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
They're the same thing.
Yeah.
But he desperately needs, maybe he doesn't need, when you go to the gym, you work out various parts of your body.
Right.
The one you hate the most is probably what needs the most work.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So the mathematician needs his butt kicked a little bit in English class or history, because he's kind of...
Right. Right. And it's not so that he can sort of level up when it comes to being a math guy. We're not trying to create math guys. We're trying to create guys.
Right.
We're trying to create humans, integral, well-formed. Well, Aristotle called it eudaimonia, right?
Mm-hmm.
This sort of the idea of a flourishing person is that one who can do all the things that he or she ought to be able to do.
Can enjoy
Yeah.
whatever they're doing.
Right.
As opposed to feeling like, man, I got to get up every day and do this one thing that I'm good at. Not just to make money, but because it's all I know how to do.
Right. And so you said that the Greeks understood it, and I think that you're absolutely right. And I think Coleridge understood it as well. I read Work Without Hope, but the obvious and only right poem to read for this episode is Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner.
Well,
Now it's 700 some lines.
Yeah, the longest podcast we've had since Build Soil.
Well, that's only about 300. But so it's quite long. But the notion of killing the albatross, right? He wants to understand the beauty of the albatross, so he destroys it.
Yeah.
And it's
No, that's in my
wrong.
article. Right?
That's wrong. Yeah.
Not Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, but the biology dissection.
Dissection. Yeah, exactly.
Right? That I'm going to understand this living thing by killing it and cutting it apart. Mm-hmm. You will understand its parts.
Life.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I'm getting ahead of you.
No. But I'm okay with the dissected frog as long as there's a living frog to see the difference and to bring it back together. Having seen his internal organs, this is what it does. Right.
You didn't dissect. Let's see. I don't know how far I want to push this, but it's something like, oh, I understand frogs now. Really? How's that? Well, because I dissected a frog. No. You dissected that which was a frog.
You could have
dissected a corpse.
Yes, right, exactly.
You don't understand frogs. You may have learned quite a bit about frogs from dissecting that corpse, but let's not forget what you were trying to understand from the beginning. It's not just analysis, right? But it is pursuing that whole thing.
That delight in the thing as a thing. Yes. Yeah. Just read a quick quote from Charles Dickens, one of my favorite authors, in his book Hard Times. It's fairly short. See if I can put this all together. The first paragraph of the book says, "Now what I want is facts." He's an analysis man. Mm-hmm. "Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else and root out everything else. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. Nothing else will ever be of any service to them. This is the principle on which I bring up my own children, and this is the principle on which I bring up these children. Stick to the facts, sir." Now, this is Mr. Gradgrind, the head of a school that Dickens is wanting us to not like.
For its analysis.
"Thomas Gradgrind, sir, a man of realities, a man of facts and calculations, a man who proceeds upon the principle that 2 and 2 are 4, and nothing over, and who is not to be talked into allowing for anything over." In such terms, Mr. Gradgrind always mentally introduced himself, whether to his private circle of acquaintance or to the public in general. Indeed, as he eagerly sparkled at them from the cellarage before mentioned, he seemed a kind of cannon loaded to the muzzle with facts, and prepared to blow them clean out of the regions of childhood at one discharge. He seemed a galvanizing apparatus, too, charged with a grim, mechanical substitute for the tender young imaginations that were to be stormed away. "Girl number 20. Said Mr. Gradgrind squarely, pointing with his square forefinger. "I don't know that girl. Who is that girl?" "Sissy Jupe, sir," exclaimed number 20, blushing, standing up and curtsying. "Sissy is not a name," said Mr. Gradgrind. "Don't call yourself Sissy. Call yourself Cecilia. Your names are on the spot. There you go." "Its father as calls me Sissy, sir," returned the young girl in a trembling voice, and with another curtsy. "Then he has no business to do it," said Mr. Gradgrind. "Tell him he mustn't. Cecilia Jupe, let me see. What is your father?" "He belongs to the horse riding, if you please, sir." Mr. Gradgrind frowned and waved off the objectionable calling with his hand. And he inquires for a little while, and then says, "Very well, then, he's a veterinary surgeon, a farrier, and horsebreaker. Give me your definition of a horse."
Okay, here we go.
We're back to the frog, but it's bigger.
Right.
It's a horse.
Right.
Sissy Jupe thrown into the greatest alarm by this demand. "Girl number 20, unable to define a horse," said Mr. Gradgrind, for the general behoof of all the little pitchers. Already pictured all the little kids as being little pitchers.
Oh, yeah.
That he would pour these facts into. "Girl number 20 possessed of no facts in reference to one of the commonest of animals. Some boy's definition of a horse. Bitzer? Yours." I love Bitzer.
Right.
The square finger moving here and there lighted suddenly on Bitzer, perhaps because he chanced to sit in the same ray of sunlight, which, darting in at one of the bare windows of the intensely whitewashed room, irradiated Sissy. For the boys and girls, I'm not going to get into how they divided up the room, but Bitzer, Mr. Thomas Gradgrind said, "your definition of a horse." Sir, quadruped, graminivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth, and 12 incisive, sheds coat in the spring, in marshy countries sheds hoofs too. Hoofs hard but requiring to be shod with iron, age known by marks in mouth. Thus and much more from Bitzer. Here's the punchline.
Yep.
Now, girl number 20, said Mr. Gradgrind, you know what a horse is.
Analysis.
Her father works with horses.
Yeah.
She's been around horses her whole life. She may not know all the parts and all the facts.
Yeah.
She knows horses.
Yeah.
But Mr. Gradgrind's definition of education is until you can spout off all the pieces, you don't know it. Now, I'm not necessarily arguing with his position that you know more about a horse if you know how many teeth it has.
Sure.
Or that it sheds its hoofs if in cold places or whatnot. But Sissy Jupe isn't bereft of all knowledge. Her knowledge is of a different kind.
Right.
Her knowledge is synthetic.
Right.
She knows Dobbin. Not dead Dobbin cut up into pieces.
Yep.
Or all the facts of how many teeth and stomachs and etc. that Dobbin. She knows Dobbin as the horse able to do this and that and love me and work with my father and needs this kind of care. It's a different kind of knowledge.
That's right.
The point.
That's right.
So where we started is where I'm coming back.
Yep.
It's not analysis or synthesis. It's got to be both. And the teacher has to ask themselves constantly, have I left either undone? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a real it's a challenge to do it, but once you settle into that rhythm, once you establish those patterns of moving from one to the other, it's delightful, right? It really is easier. I mean, we start to see all that education can be.
Yeah. I mean, just to give it as a little example, right? In synthesis, at the neglect of analysis, what's Hard Times about? It's a book about a guy that hates kids.
Yeah.
Doesn't address any of the specifics. Right. The Analyzer. What's the book about? Horses.
Right.
That one piece stuck.
Right.
He doesn't remember all the pieces. Right.
Sure.
So he would be even wiser to say horses and bank
Everything.
clerks and
Right,
blah, blah,
right.
blah, 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 blah. But understandings when they're brought together.
Yeah.
Right. And they can give you both answers. And I think that's an important part. I teach a lot in seminar about outlining.
Okay.
Because it's, I think, with reading, one of the most fundamental skills when it comes to analysis. But my outlines are not just an analytical outline. That's the middle.
Okay.
The first thing in my outlines for seminar is a statement of the whole.
Gotcha.
Having read pages 5 through 23, in one sentence,
Right.
tell me what this is about.
Okay.
Now show me how that's true. Fundamental arguments, supporting evidence, etc. And then, at the end, a conclusion. How might this affect how I live my life? Now, we're doing philosophy. We're doing works designed to affect one's life.
Yeah.
Right? It'd be tougher. There ought to be an answer, but it'd be much tougher to do that conclusion for Hard Times or something like that, but or a portion of Hard Times.
Right.
But I think the mind wants to do this.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, I think it's frustrated if either is left undone. They feel like they've been ripped off.
Right.
And I would observe that in most cases, if there hasn't been any analysis, synthesis almost seems impossible. I don't have anything to put together.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that it strikes me just now that when a student asks, "When are we ever going to use this?" that it's them. So sometimes having done some analysis and then not having done any synthesis,
As it were,
that
they don't know what the point
yeah,
is.
right, and so then they're at this. Well, it's a frustration. They're frustrated.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And so it may be appropriate then to say, rather than so here's the thing though. They want synthesis, but they've asked a question that we often answer analytically.
Yep.
And so
Bingo.
it would probably be better to say, boy, I don't know. What are we doing? Right? Because it's then that they go, yeah, what are we doing?
Right. Well,
And we get going down that synthesis track.
we have a bad habit of answering the question at a practical level.
Mm-hmm.
You can balance your checkbook.
Yeah. Congrats.
That's cringe, Mr. Elliott.
Yeah, I don't even use that.
Don't
right.
you have an online bank account where that's all kind of... So, yeah. I could go on and on. One other thought came to my head as we were talking, and it didn't make it into my article because it just struck me now. My father was a hobby pilot and was in a flying club, so 8 men each owned an equal part of this very expensive airplane.
Okay. Wow.
And so I spent a good chunk of my life out at the airport.
Yeah.
Sometimes Dad was flying, and sometimes he was just hanging around airplanes.
Sure.
But a fellow was coming in on final approach, bringing that baby into the most dangerous parts of flying is landing a plane, right? And he's everything's going well, and there's just this horrendous sound. Sounded like a cannon went off.
Okay.
And I of course, we all looked at the plane and saw the prop come to a stop.
Ugh.
And it's a small plane. He floated it in. He landed it. It was fixed struts. Everything was fine.
Okay. Oh.
Except for this big old hole in the cowling on the side where the engine was.
Okay.
And a couple of them got into the guy that ran the airport had a Jeep. And they got in that Jeep and went running around out looking where that sound had roughly occurred.
Uh-huh.
And came back in with a piston
Whoa.
that had blown out. So now most
It threw it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and an aluminum block, right? Most plane engines are built for lightness, and it had come out the side, right?
Whoa.
Now this was before my experience with my dad in the backyard. That I started with.
Right.
But had that experience in the backyard happened, I might have asked my father, "Can you fix it?" I was so amazed by his ability to fix it. But the answer would have been, "You can't put that back.
Right.
Something has so fundamentally broken the hole."
Right.
Right? And I sometimes have contemplated that with this larger synthesis, analysis, parts and whole, that it's possible to so teach something that it can't make sense.
Right.
Either you've left some big I don't know what
You've
how you throw
irreparably damaged.
throw a rod out.
Right.
But the mind has to you got to replace it.
Right.
Be taught again.
Wow.
Right. And I've seen sometimes kids taught. It seems to happen a lot in math.
Mm-hmm.
So I get in trouble here, but 2 major ways to teach reading, right?
Mm-hmm.
The phonetic formation and whole language say method, the sort of memory method.
Right.
And I've watched this. To me, my opinion here, listeners, the whole language. If it, I don't mind it coming along to try and aid some aspects of phonetics.
Yeah.
But if phonics aren't the driving force, it's almost like it's thrown a rod in reading.
Yeah. because you're going to get to those words.
The kid will come up to a word and go,
Yeah, right.
you know, in my medieval class, it's like every other word. Right?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
And the phonics-based learners, those that were taught to sound it out, attempt. Right? Hippopotamus.
You good?
You got it.
Right.
Right? And the other one just goes, eh.
Right.
What's that word? Right? And you tell them hippopotamus and hope they remember
Yeah.
the next time they see that big old long word.
Yeah.
And they go, helicopter.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
Wrong memory.
Good try.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I threw a rod at the very end there. But
No, I think that's right, but I think it's another conversation. This because it's an interesting idea. Can you irreparably damage some aspect of formation or of someone's education? What
Well,
are
you can
the
certainly tell them that the
signs?
engine doesn't even exist.
Right.
Right? We do that a
Mhm.
lot. We this is the reduction that we've talked about on several occasions.
Right.
We just go on a
That's not real.
yeah,
That's,
or that's nothing
some people
but,
believe that.
that's nothing but.
Right.
Nothing buttery.
Yeah.
Right? And I hear that a lot where a highly complex, multi-part thing
Mm-hmm.
is sold as, you know, that carburetor is just a carburetor.
that's a carburetor.
There's no pieces to it. You
Right.
can't fix it.
Yeah.
Right, you know. Not to
Yeah.
get into consumerism here, but
Right.
why try and fix it? Buy a new generator. What are you
Right,
doing,
right.
man?
Yeah.
And I'm, you know, to this day thankful for the teachers who have helped me tear it down, analyze it, and then kindly, gently help me put it back together. Often, right? I thought I knew what it was before analysis. After analysis, really? And when it's put back together, it's like it's a different thing.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? That carburetor,
Absolutely.
that carburetor's so much more
Right.
when you know what all's in it.
Yeah. Well,
Then when
and
it's
what
just
it
a stick.
does
Yeah.
and what it's for and how it
that
works.
One little piece with the crack in it
Right.
was messing everything up.
Yeah.
Which, you know, not to get too deep into Paul, but, you know, or James.
Yeah.
Right? The tongue is such a small thing and
Right.
it can set the whole world on fire.
Mm.
Or a podcast if I...
Get your education. Backporch education. You can't have your meat if you don't eat your vegetables.